of this fall season. We hope to see you every month. We have a year full of programs till next May, which I think you'll find interesting. My name's Diane Hart. I'm president of the board of Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. I've seen many of you here before. I'm glad to see you here again. And I am delighted to say that since the last time I was here and you were here, we now have a new executive director. And I'd like to introduce him tonight and ask him to introduce our speaker. His name is Matthew Dotter. Many of you may know him from his birding classes. He's been teaching birding classes at Palo Alto High School for 20 years? 22 years. I've always been afraid to take one because I thought they were for way too advanced birders to me, and I'm a very late adult onset birder. So I'm a terminal intermediate best case. But he assures me that if I come, so I'm going to sign up for winter quarter. This prevented me to do it this year. I banged up my foot. Can't do field trips. That I will not feel intimidated. So that means that any of you might want to join one of his classes. I'm just letting you know. It's not going to be too scary. But he also introduced himself to me as an avian evangelist. And how could you not love a man who comes into your life when you're looking for an executive director for an Audubon Society who says he's an avian evangelist? So, of course we hired him. How could we not? So, Matthew, please.
I don't know if I should be using this or not. It looks like it's not on. I'll talk loudly. So,
Teacher voice.
Yeah, I'm fairly new executive director at Audubon, and I have to say that after spending nearly all of my life as a birder and interacting with Audubon for at least 2 decades, this is a dream come true for me, this position. And I'm very happy to be here to talk to you and look forward to doing this for years and years. I wanted to tell you a moment about Audubon. Many of you already know it, but events like this speaker series, where we're going to be hearing from Bill, is an ongoing thing every couple of months, every month during the course of the year. Your membership helps support that, and also supports other programs, our education programs with children and adults of all ages, our conservation efforts across the county, from burrowing owls to western bluebirds, tricolored blackbirds, black skimmers. We're involved with a number of projects that not only protect species, but restore habitat. So membership fees go toward supporting all of our work there, but we also offer these for free, and we're very glad you're here tonight. So thank you for coming here, and I wanted to take a moment to introduce Bill, who I've known of for several years, but I've only recently started to get to know him better. And I'm surprised at that because we actually have quite a bit in common. He said he was born in Maine. I grew up, after being born in California, I grew up in New England, and he's born into a birding family. I've been birding my entire life, essentially. And he's been teaching classes.
You're not dead yet, are you?
No, I'm not dead yet. He's been teaching classes for a good long time. He's a field trip leader, as I am, and I think we have an awful lot in common, and I'm very happy to have him here. And I guess with that, we'll just see what he has to say. So let's give it up for Bill.
Okay.
Thank you. So, yeah, like he said, I grew up in Maine, and it was a long time ago, 40-something years ago in the 70s, and I remember we could tell which mill was processing by the color of the river. If it was purple, they were doing the linoleum for the cars. If it was yellow, it was disgusting. It was a moving, just pile of sludge. And I thought to myself, how can, if we're past that, they say tipping point, it can't be repaired. We're done, we're doomed for it. And you heard, especially in the 70s, people running around saying, you know, the sky is falling. And that was about when they stopped the mills from dumping into the river. And during the 80s, the rivers went just dead clean. And by dead clean, I meant they were barren. No fish, no life, anything, not even algae. But then, after about 10 years, we started to get some algae and some willows. Frogs came in with some of the other birds chasing the frogs, and suddenly, about 15 years later, the fish were there. And by about 90, you could almost not tell. And within 10 years after that, you literally couldn't tell that this was once just sludge of industrial waste. And that is, to me, you take your love of the environment and you take your love of birds, and that meets in the middle at the habitat. And I'm glad you brought that up. And that's sort of what we're trying to do. What can we do to help the population of birds and the recovery of endangered species? It all comes down to the habitat. In the Central Valley, they've done a great job with the National Wildlife Refuge. And here, what we've done in the South Bay has been fantastic. What inspired me for this talk was when I moved here in 1990, I missed the bald eagles of Maine. And then I didn't know, sort of in the background, down at Ventana, they were actually releasing bald eagles. And that's how we got them. That's sort of the big secret. We'll get into that in a minute. But starting in about 2005, I was poking around on eBird. Garrett over here saw a bald eagle at Grant Lake, up near where Kitty and I live, and 2005. And that was one of the very first ones. And I remember it was a big deal in 2006. They found some outside of Calaveras, 2 dead baby bald eagles, meaning they had nested for the first time since DDT back in the 70s, or even before that, in the 50s and 60s. So that sort of inspired me. Like, where did these eagles come from? And I'm going to figure this out. And I said, what other stories are like this? Let me just go and try to find these, like, stories of hope and happiness. And it turns out it's a bit of a mixed bag. We've done a lot of things, and some things are come up and drop back, and some of the things that come up aren't quite what you wanted. But it's interesting to know that we can make a difference.
Matthew, lights.
Oh, yeah. So just a little bit about me. Matthew already said bird enthusiast. I like that. Avian evangelist. I'm going to use that if I can remember that.
Trademarked.
So just a little bit about me. I am a field trip leader and former field trip coordinator for the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. And that's sort of how I picked up with birds here when I moved to California. My first field trip was with Frank Vonslager, who's back here up at Redwood Shores, and he blew me away. How amazing that we had this habitat, and that every time a bird flew over, he could tell you what it was without looking. Still looking through his scope, calling out birds. I'm like, that's magic. And since then, I've learned how to bird by ear, but that really changed my life. We also, Kitty and I also volunteer for the San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory. This year, we did the gull survey. We won't do that again. Also docent with Open Space Authority and all their lands. And there's some secret lands we can get into through them, which is kind of neat. And doing work with the Santa Clara County Parks, City of San Jose, and some other organizations doing like owl programs and so forth. I put a blue grosbeak here because we had a really special event happen, at least in my life. We were out on the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society Birdathon in April. Actually, our birdathon was on May the 4th, but we do a warm-up the week before, and it was late April. And a lot of the team is here, Garrett, Barry, Ginger, Kitty. And for some reason, I was going out of my mind, check the fences, you people, you're not checking the fences. And Barry, Gordon turned around and said, all right, I'll check the fences. Are you kidding? A blue grosbeak at Ed Levin, Sandy Wool, up the hill there. And that hadn't been seen there in decades. And in fact, it had been breeding down the hill where it's now all developed. And that hadn't happened in decades. So we were really, really excited to see a blue grosbeak that wasn't down at Pajaro in the South County. And as part of Songs of Recovery, we're going to play some songs, bird songs for you.
I don't know how loud this is going to be. We'll see.
Yeah, turn it up a little bit.
That's loud.
Yeah, let's move it last. This is the song of the blue grosbeak. Exactly. So for each bird that we touch on, there's going to be a special story of it coming back into the county, and then we're going to listen to the song that it brought back. So this is sort of songs and recovery together. If you see this license plate out in the field, it's attached to my little red bird buggy. And it's an interesting story. Kitty was doing voice to text one time and said, remember to listen to that mystery bird that we recorded. We had audio taped a bird and we weren't sure what it was. And it came up Mr. eBird. And within about 10 seconds, I had ordered the license plate off the DMV without her knowing. And that night at dinner, she said, "You're not going to believe it. I went on the DMV website and I said, ooh, I know where this is going." She said, "I tried to get you the license plate, Mr. eBird, but it was already taken." And I said, "Oh, it's because I got it." She said, "I checked right away." I said, "I checked right away before you." We both knew instantly. So if you see Mr. eBird out in the field, that's me. So it's very exciting to me. Bald eagles are back. When they were first coming back, I would tell people about it. I would literally start crying. They thought I was crazy, like call up the people in white suits kind of a thing. Most of the pictures in here were taken either by me or Garrett or Barry. A couple of them I pulled off the internet. This particular bald eagle was the other morning up at Grant Lake. And this one, if you get a close look, is a little bit beat up and bedraggled, so it's struggling out there to survive. We see bald eagles all over the county now. Where there were none, there aren't a plenty where you see them like you're in Alaska and there's 12 in a tree, but we're getting them all along the western hills, all down in the southern reservoirs at Calaveras and, Coyote and Calero and all, Anderson, thank you. We have them right at Kirtner Elementary on the east side in Milpitas. We get them up at Felt Lake and on the Stanford campus. Sometimes when we're driving out 152 to go up over Pacheco Pass, you'll see them at that Pacheco Pond over there. So, what a dream. A bird that was literally extirpated from this county has come back and come back in a big way. Why did they come back? Well, it all came down as a part and parcel with the Condor Recovery Project. So down at Ventana near Big Sur, between 1986 and the year 2000, they released 70-something, over 70 young bald eagles into the wild. And those bald eagles started to propagate north and south. And the reason they did that is they had taken all of the condors in from the wild. They had very few mistakes to make. One mistake could put this entire species at peril. So they took bald eagles and used them to practice their techniques for raising the bird, releasing it, getting things just right. And then a few years later, in 1992, they started releasing California condors down there. The condors are moved from extinct in the wild, where we took them all out of the wild and had them in. Now they're just critically endangered, and they've even begun to stop the practice of putting the license plates on their wings with some of the newest ones. So we're at a point now where we're beyond trying to track every single individual, and in fact they're using some more modern techniques. This particular picture here is 2 California condors up on Mount Hamilton, where Kitty and I have a home, on the Lick Observatory, the antenna up there. And that's a young condor, so that's bred in the wild and flying all the way from Pinnacles up to Mount Hamilton. They'll fly over 100 miles in a day. Easy, a condor can. They'll go from, there's 2 main colonies down there, one at Pinnacles and one at Big Sur, and they'll fly in a corridor back and forth between the 2. And part of this is they are beginning to release condors in the far east in the Sierra foothills, and then in the north up in Klamath area. So the release is going to start new populations. We're at a point now where there are currently wild in Central California about 98 California condors. And there's only those 2 main sites. That's not enough diversity. If something happens to one, you've lost half your population. So they're trying to get maybe 4, 5, 6 colonies going, so that if anything happens to 1 or 2, you still got some others going. Things are going in the right direction. In '87, we hit rock bottom. You can see in '92 released a few, apparently didn't go well, and now the wild population in Central California is growing pretty well. If you look at a closer look over the past few years, it's growing, but not quite at the rate it did in the beginning. So it's a good steady growth, which hopefully is more sustainable. Back to the bald eagles locally, this chart shows how many occupied territories are measured in Central California for bald eagles. So back in '86, they started releasing them. They started it when it first started to tick up here, a little further north in '92, and now we have over 25, and that's only 2012, probably over 30 by now, areas with active bald eagles. That's a lot. So we're doing real well. Here in the Bay Area, this is the South Bay. We are somewhere in Los Altos. There's Saratoga, somewhere in Los Altos. So you can see the red dots. This is just right out of eBird. The red dots are sightings in the last 30 days. So this is the one Kitty and I saw at Grant, and that was that picture I showed you earlier. This is out towards the Central Valley, up over Mount Hamilton. You've got the ones up at Pacheco Pass, all along the west. And wherever there's water, you're going to find bald eagles. So the reservoirs that we have to bring us water turn out to have sort of a dual purpose. The osprey and the bald eagles and the herons and egrets all find a lot of habitat around their edges. On July 4th, Kitty and I woke up unsure of what we were going to do. We always go birding, so we were just unsure what direction we were going to go birding in. And I had this brainstorm, why don't we try to make a picture of a bald eagle and post it on Facebook, just to do something fun. So we went down to Kirtner Elementary in the morning, and I got this picture. And we said, now what are we going to do? We did that. It seemed like it should have been a really hard thing to do, and we were going to spend the whole day chasing a bald eagle and get one just before sunset. No, it was too easy. Good problem to have.
Do you want to hear one?
Yeah, let's do
How
it.
do they capture fish?
They catch them with their claws. So a bald eagle will come in similar to an osprey, and they'll just pick it right off the water with their claws. If the fish is too heavy and they can't lift back off with it, oftentimes the fish is too heavy, they'll dip their wings in the water. The wings will get wet, and they won't be able to take off. So the bald eagle has an instinctual technique. They'll swim through the water back to the shore. We see this quite a bit in Maine coming out of the rivers when they get a fish that's a little too big. And the release mechanism, they can't let go of the fish in the water, is actually to release the fish, they have to push against ground, and that unlocks their back talon. So they can't do that in the water. They don't have anything to push
Has
against.
anyone ever made a movie of that process?
Yeah, uh-huh.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, if you look on the internet,
Show
you
it
can see.
sometime.
Yeah, I will. That would be a good one to
Okay,
show.
here's our majestic bald eagle.
Okay.
Yes. That's the bald eagle.
It does not sound like a red-tailed hawk.
No. Yeah, the red-tailed hawk is just the universal symbol of all raptors.
Right.
So where did you take a picture of that bottom one?
Oh, that's a great question. You can tell it's my picture because if I snipped one, it would have been better than that. This one is very young. So this is in the first year. And you can tell the golden eagle and the bald eagle look very, very similar when they're young. They're both dark. The bald eagle has a larger beak and a shorter tail, like somebody grabbed the beak and pulled it forward. A golden eagle has a little bit longer tail and shorter beak, like somebody pulled the tail and pulled the beak back. The big difference you can tell if it's flying, this white patch is in the armpit for a bald eagle, and it's out here for the golden eagle, out on the wing. Otherwise, you look up and see a big bird, and it's young like that, it's
How
tough.
do they catch fish?
How do they catch fish? They come down out of the sky and just pick them with their talons right off the top
Or
of the
steal
water.
them.
And they're not against stealing fish either. They'll come in and take it from another bald eagle or anybody else that's got one. They're kind of an apex kind of predator. So to me, this is great news. So this is the same bird. So this just reminded me, that picture and the one that you asked about is from the Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge. And it was landing and taking off and landing again. Look at the branches, little tiny spindly. This thing would land and just sway around and then take off again and try it again.
Not a fish.
Not a fish. I loved this shot when I saw it with the red-winged blackbird.
Is the red wing trying to get the fish?
No. Carrying the eagles. So the range from the Ventana has expanded to the south, all the way to the Mexican border. And I was down in San Diego a few years ago, and I saw a bald eagle in it.
Wow.
What? And that was before I sort of put the connection together, because up here we had them, not for long. And I was thinking, oh, they must have just expanded down from from Washington through Oregon, Shasta, and worked their way down. That was my assumption. No, these came up from the south. It's kind of a backwards recovery. And our population that came through here has in fact linked up with the northern population. So there's no gap of bald eagle population anymore, all the way from the Mexican border to Alaska. One straight line.
It's all being done on their own. You're not capturing birds.
These are captured eggs from Alaska that were brought to Big Sur and released. 70 young birds were released between 1986 and the year 2000, down south in Big Sur. And those are the birds that are here now.
Oh, but they, what they
making it
do,
on their
10
own.
at a time, say? or-
Yeah, something like this.
Oh, okay,
Mhm.
all right.
Maybe even less. It was 14 years, so 5 at a time, 14 years, 70 birds.
Is this ongoing?
No, stopped in the year 2000. Good question, sir.
So the northern population is essentially inbreeding, but the southern population would be sort of outbreeding?
Yeah, I mean, they all came from the north. So we went and got the bald eagles from Alaska, brought them down, bred them in captivity, and then released them down here, down in Big Sur.
But you said that they're coming up from the south, that presumably Mexico, so they'd be breeding with bald eagles from Mexico?
No, the bald eagles coming from the south were brought from Alaska by us
Also
Oh,
Alaska.
and then released in Big Sur. And now they've moved, that range has expanded since '86 until now, 33 years. The two populations have reconnected again.
How did you get them from Alaska? What was the deal? How?
They capture young and then bring them down and raise them in captivity, and they brought some eggs as well. They tried, and this was part of this whole, it was an experiment for figuring out how to handle the condors. Like a
Makes sense.
pilot run, test, dry run. Right? Another area, so this was kind of human intervention, not necessarily just habitat. And I really wanted my original, that was the whole spark of why we're here tonight. Habitat is a big part of what we can do to help. And the Audubon Society and a lot of organizations were involved in the restoration of the burrowing owl habitat. Unfortunately, when they retrofitted Terminal B and put in new airstrips at the airport, they took out nearly all of the burrowing owl habitat in Santa Clara County. We used to go over to the airport and watch them. Planes would be landing above and burrowing owl would fly up and land back in its hole. That was the only space that was big enough left for them to be. Between Cisco and the city of San Jose, as mitigation for the airport, they donated, it's actually about 208 acres in the El Viso, Milpitas area. It's Arzino Ranch, and it's pretty scary if you think about it. There were, in the 80s, there were 600 adults being monitored here, adult burrowing owls in the valley. And in 2009, that got down to 70. Almost 90% of the burrowing owls gone. And that's in the whole valley. Now, this breeding survey I found this is from SFBBO, and what you really care about is the winter breeding count to winter breeding count to winter breeding count. The summer breeding count is just the ones that have left, and the ones that are left over, they're still counting with the babies. So you're looking at 65 to 66 to 83 to 91. So from winter of 15 to the winter spring of 18 last year, We went from 65 to 91 breeding adults. It's a 40% increase, so it's going in the right direction. They've only got a couple of places they can breed around here. Arzino is a critical habitat. Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society played an important role in that. A couple of years ago, in fact it was 2015 or 16, I went with Josh and some of the guys, and we were taking they have the still cameras, motion detection, we were taking the SD cards out, and we counted 48 young, and then it looks like the year after that, they counted 29 young. So there's some up years and some down years, and you can't always tell exactly why, predation, weather, something else. Yes?
Why are they called burrowing owls? Do they actually burrow anywhere? Or-
They do. No owls make nests, except burrowing owls, and not the burrowing owls here. Only the burrowing owls in Florida where it's sandy and they can dig easily. All owls, including our burrowing owls, steal their nest. Ours steal them mostly from ground squirrels. But they can take them from marmots or any other burrowing mammal. And the great horned owl will steal a raven's nest, or more often a red-tailed hawk's nest. So no owls really build their nests. They all just take them.
I have a lot of gopher holes that they could use.
That's right. So it's a very special habitat they need. They need shortish grass, they need a mound or a stick that they can see on so they can see over the field, and they need burrows to already be there, and then they need the right food supply, on and on, without the predators. And that list of requirements, there's very, very few places can meet. And they generally take, for a breeding pair, about 100 acres. Here we have 200 acres with dozens of nests on it. So we've really taken them, just crammed them into, it's almost like a concentration camp for burrowing owls.
Is it public land, Arzino now?
Arzino is protected public land, yeah.
Is it part of Don Edwardson?
No, it's separate,
Okay.
yeah. It's part of it, I think it's protected under the city, that one is. And Don Edwards is national. This is from the Audubon website, you probably recognize it, with a little time ticker symbol on the bottom. Yeah, if you go along Ditch Drive up there, I got a picture of them yesterday. There was a pair, a young one and the mom nuzzling and stuff. It's pretty cute.
Where did you go?
And this is Arzino Ranch. It's like this, spelled like this, Arzino, and it's in Milpitas, El Viso area near Don Edwards, and by the Jubilee Church, which is now
It's not called the Redemption.
Redemption Church. And there's a huge plot of land there, 208 acres.
There's signs on the fence that say burrowing owl habitat, so you'll know when you get there. Disc drive, like technology, DISK drive.
And there are other places that they have those signs. We see it at by Harvey Marsh there, they have it, and by Shoreline, they have these signs that say burrowing owl habitat. But only Arzino has the breeding pairs of any quantity. So now we've made it from bald eagles almost to the salt marsh. The biggest sort of boon for environmental change here in the Bay Area is the bay itself, the salt marshes. And when I came here in 1990, I was completely mesmerized by this amount of acreage that was just left to sort of industrial waste and salt mining. I couldn't believe it. And they still exist up on the East Bay. Cargill is still there. But there has been an incredible salt marsh restoration here in the South Bay. These are the ponds. It was a 53 pond purchase back in 2003. And Cargill sold those 53 ponds, totaling over 15,000 acres of marshland for $100 million. Seems like a good deal, but
It does seem like a good deal. We should have bought that.
You don't really consider eagles as a migratory type. They kind of like remain in an area, maybe 10 square miles?
correct.
They do not really migrate.
They don't. That's
Yeah.
correct. But they will expand their range as too many eagles are on spot. They'll push out in each direction.
Oh, okay, if they get too many. huh?
Correct. So what happened in 2003, the salt ponds were turned over from Cargill and salt production to environmentally managed. And there is a 50-year plan in place, and we are 16 years into it. So we're about a third of the way. And what has happened, I mean, it's been political battles and what to do, what ponds to breach. So the initial goal for, and if you don't understand, all of these ponds were blocked from the ocean, and they didn't have tidal marshes. They used to all be tidal marshes, and the salt company came in and just blocked them all off. So any of the tidal species that lived there just had to leave and go somewhere else. Mostly up the peninsula and up the East Bay past where they were doing this kind of salt harvesting. And they start to breach the ponds, and that means, like here in A6 in 2010, they breached A6, one of the earlier of this whole chain is now in 11 they breached these A5, 7, and 8. When they breached this, they put gates in, and they open the gates, they can control it. And then when the tide comes up, the water comes in and out and in and out. The pollution in some of these, A8 in particular with its mercury and other pollution, was off the charts. Like, you know, there's levels that you're supposed to have to be safe, and it's been used for industrial purposes for decades and almost a century. And there was a big battle between environmentalists. Some people said, you have to clean this up before you can breach it. And other environmentalists said, the way you clean it up is by breaching it. The water will come in and out and clean it. They said, but you're putting those toxins in the water. Well, they didn't clean it up first. They breached it, and it seems like it's okay. I mean, there's so much mercury contamination from still now in the mud from the gold rush era. And this is no exception. In fact, yesterday, Kitty and I, just sort of getting in the spirit of this talk, went to the marina and took the Salt Marsh Safari, which is a pontoon flat boat that can hold about 30 people. And we went out, it must be 4 miles, 3.5 miles, this Guadalupe River to where it meets the Coyote Creek. And then we came back on this boat, and then we were with the Rangers. It was like a ranger training thing, and that was pretty fun. One point of interest is when they did breach A6, there was the largest colony of California gulls breeding there. And that's sort of a story to be told in a second. The gulls had to leave for whatever reason. That big of a change, right? It was a non-tidal marsh. They breached it, the tide comes in and out, and the gull said, yeah, it's not what it used to be, we don't breed here anymore. Here's the gull colony. This picture is from the corner where I put that dot, the corner of A9, 10, 11, and 14. I was standing right here. Every one of these levees was slammed like this with California gulls.
Is fresh water available for wildlife in that area, or is it all salt?
No, the fresh water comes in from the Guadalupe and then from the Coyote. So this is what they call brackish. So the tide is going to come in and out through this. So that's the freshest water you can get. So when the tide is going out and the water, you know, the salt water is mixed up, you will see a lot of birds, cormorants and gulls and stuff flapping around, pelicans flapping around in the fresh brackish water to get. It's a good question. So standing at that intersection, I could see thousands and thousands of gulls in all 4 directions. And it's not, you know, when we're doing the gull survey, and their nest is nothing more than just some scratching on the ground. They like to put a few sticks, maybe a piece of a broken balloon or a plastic spoon or something, like a raven will do. And then there's just eggs sitting there on the ground. It's the most primitive thing you've ever seen. The cormorant's nests are also mixed in with these, and we had to be real careful because if you get too close to the cormorant nest, the cormorant will flee the nest for its safety, and those eggs would last seconds. Like, with that many gulls around, cormorant off the nest, those eggs were gone instantly. So we had to be real careful of the cormorant's nest when we were out there.
Are these the ones that migrate to Mono Lake?
Yes,
Okay, I see you drought at Mono.
Correct. So why do we have this huge number of gulls? We didn't used to have them here. So the salt pond restoration brought back sort of just industrial salt harvest ponds. So we sort of turned it into a little bit more of a natural environment. That was number one. Number two, Mono Lake is drying up, and the drought has it drying even faster. So the habitat for California gulls was bad. They didn't have enough food. So they had to go looking for places, and they found us. The population has absolutely exploded. They've logged 15 active breeding colonies, 10 that are still active today, the one on A6 being one of the ones that are not. The problem is, it sounds like a great success story. Yay, we've got all these gulls. They're a nuisance at the landfills, which is their abundance of food. And they're also a nuisance for these other endangered species we're about to talk about. They will eat anything. They're omnivores. So here's the gull population in the 80s. 1980, there were 200 California gulls surveyed in the South Bay. You'll see that on a small raft today. You can see the population was already growing. In 2000, this is when the restoration project began. So the timing of 2003, 2004 is interesting. Also coincides with mono habitat going down and then this being available. So it kind of makes sense. You're wondering somewhere around here, like, where is this going to go? It seems to have stabilized a little bit. It was interesting though, back in 2013, the San Jose Mercury News actually featured, I remember this, I had the paper actually, it's 2013, it was only 6 years ago. It seems like 20 years ago since I had a paper. Anyway, I had a newspaper and I saw this. We went from 24 in 1980, I think it was 282, to 53,000 something gulls in 2013. That is a lot. That's a big explosion.
May I just interject something?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was in the middle 70s when LA Water and Power were diverting the biggest creek that flowed into Mono Lake.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
it was at that time, I think it was in 1975, Sierra Club and Audubon Society filed suit against LA Water and Power for misuse of public trust. And it's kind of a David and Goliath thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually won. So as a result of that lawsuit, LA Water and Power had to maintain a certain level in Mono Lake. They weren't allowed to just take all the water like they did in Owens Valley. So I always tell people that during that period of time of the lawsuit and it getting settled, the California gull could no longer nest on Megan Island.
Mm-hmm.
And so they kind of flew around and said, I wonder where
This looks good. Just in time for us to
Yeah.
fix up the South Bay. Come on in, guys. Like, we made the bed.
And I think that's what happened.
That's very interesting. Well, all these gulls came here. It does have an impact on Forster's Tern, avocets, and our snowy plovers.
I thought Mono Lake by law must be kept at a certain level.
That's correct. Yep.
Well, why, I don't understand
The
it.
drought, you can't do anything about Mother Nature. LA Water can stop taking it, but it doesn't have much of a natural source of water down there.
It wasn't until the lawsuit that was established, that Mono Lake had a specified level below which it was not supposed to go.
So like the piping plover on the East Coast, the snowy plover is very similar, where it likes these sandy beaches that dogs and people like to play on, so their habitat has shrunk dramatically. But we have them nesting in the South Bay, and I saw them this spring. Kitty and I were looking at Spreckles near Grant, near the Education Center, and we saw baby snowy plovers with their parents running around
Where?
at Alviso,
Grand and Spreckles.
Grand and Spreckles, the entrance road to the Education Center. One thing I found interesting was they tried an experiment in 2008 to, instead of just dark sand and mud, which is, I mean, the tidal areas the snowy plovers don't do, they like non-tidal, sandy. So the ongoing effort of breaching these non-tidal ponds is actually reducing the snowy plover habitat. So it's one thing battling to get more habitat for rails and salt harvest mouse and all these other animals, and then now you take it away from somebody else. But they found that by putting down oyster shells, it really gave the snowy plovers camouflage, and they chose those areas to nest in. Jury's still out after 11 years of doing this. Definitely more nests there. They've just had some real up and down years, like 1 year, 70-something% hatching rate with, then your first year is still pretty terrible, but another year, the next year, 23% hatch success rate, predators getting the eggs and stuff. So it's really up and down with this bird. Predation is a big problem. Is a snowy plover not the cutest?
It's the cutest.
For sure, along with burrowed owl.
Burrowing owl's pretty good. So you can see the general trend of the survey is sort of going up. It's nothing dramatic. Listed as threatened in 1993. It's a species of special concern in California. The South Bay, or the Bay Area, it's not just South, goal was for 500 breeding adults, and we're at about 200. And we're reducing the habitat. The good news is they did double the critical habitat set aside. And this is the whole West Coast. Oregon, Washington, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife took it from 12,000 acres up to almost 25,000 acres of protected land.
What are the predators in the salt marsh?
Number one predator for snowy plovers is the California gull. That
Oh.
went from 200 to 50,000. So that's not good. Number two, ravens. And then some other birds, peregrine falcons, but it's a pretty small bird for a peregrine. A lot of skunks, and cats and dogs can be a predator for, in particular cats, birds, but these are out in the salt marshes where there aren't so many cats. But you'll get skunks and raccoons and so forth. So average over the study, they said 58% of the hatchlings are predated in the first year. So that's more than half. And then the rest that perish due for some other reason. Some years it's bad weather or some kind of weird heat or something.
What was that about managing predators for the snowy plover?
Yeah, so what
predators are there?
what predators? California gull.
Well, on your list up there,
Mm-hmm.
the last one says, manage and expand, manage predators.
Correct.
How are they doing that?
What predators do they have?
They have California gull is the number one predator.
Well, how do you manage them?
So what you can do in a plover nesting site, once they nest, you put a cage over the nest that has big enough holes that the plovers can get out, but not so big that the gulls or skunk or whatever can get in, for one example.
What are the predators of these birds?
Golf.
Gulls is the number one. Ravens,
I grew
skunk.
up with a cat.
No,
Our
no.
cat was indoors and outdoors, but never, ever, ever caught a bird.
Right, some do. So this is from the South Bay Restoration website, and they have 3 goals: restore and enhance the habitat, and they've got 40% of of the 15,000 acres. They're starting out going with half tidal and half non-tidal, and that was a big debate. How much do you do? Do you do it all? Well, then you've completely eliminated the other habitat. So of the 15,000, they're gonna restore 7,500 to salt marsh, and then they're about 3,000 acres into that. In terms of trails, they're trying to get the public out there, and they want to make sure whatever they do doesn't cause a flood. I think it's pretty interesting, what we saw out there from the boat yesterday. I can really feel like there's a lot more plant matter. It's almost like we've got our own little, rainforest or boreal forest. You know, we've got our own oxygen engine right in the middle of the bay that was just barren rock and evaporating salt ponds. And now more and more we're seeing just thick green vegetation, pickleweeds and tule and habitat. It's fantastic.
That's gotta help the climate.
Yes.
Yeah.
The cooling,
Cooling.
the air.
One of the things with all the tule that's down there, they said as the water levels rise, that is a sponge, and that was missing. So when you have just concrete and salt, there's nothing to absorb anything. Now you have this real robust environment to handle water if it comes in. So we're gonna look at, real quick at a few birds that have come back into our county over the last few years. One is the black skimmer. They had nested historically at Shoreline, and then they moved up to Radio Road in Redwood Shores. And we used to go up there and look at them. And then one time we went up and it was all under construction and gonna be like a parking lot for IKEA or something. And
The water treatment plant, actually.
the heavy winds and rain and over time at Shoreline, it rinsed away and blew away the sand off that island on Shoreline Lake where they were nesting. And then I read something from Ryan Phillips on SBB. It was very interesting. He said they did an experiment where they put sand back on the island last year, and then this spring, lo and behold, the skimmers are back. And we counted 27 birds one time, which is a record in my knowledge. I mean, I'd seen onesie, twosies, maybe 5 or 6 would be a big number. 27 at once with babies, the whole deal. The other day, Kitty and I were out birding Salt Pond, A16, out by the pump house. We saw half a dozen skimmers with young flying around, calling. In fact, do you want to do the
Sure.
skimmer call if we're still hooked up?
If the speakers are still hooked up. They got tired, I heard them.
Yeah, so we got skimmers back in county, which to me is very exciting. I love this bird. It's like our own little sea toucan. This is what we heard. Chattery, huh?
Very chattery.
I don't know, the skimmer baby's pretty cute.
It's pretty cute.
They're born with a short beak then.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's not really short.
And this, just to credit, this is the Ryan Phillips picture from eBird, and that's Garrett's picture from Shoreline. Another bird that's made a great recovery, we hardly used to ever get them. The only place you could really get it up in Palo Alto, and now they've started moving down into the salt marshes. We hear them quite often. So the salt marsh habitat is increasing, as we mentioned. They're 40% of the way through. So these guys, of that 40%, they're already moving. They're going to have 2.5 times more salt marsh habitat to occupy and expand into. It's really exciting. I went through eBird and tried to find, there was a smattering, maybe 5 or definitely less than 10 sightings before 2003. If you stay really in the South Bay, if you get up towards the edges, out of the salt ponds, you start to see them back in the day. And they've been increasingly more common. Kitty and I were down in Gilroy Water Treatment Plant this spring. We were looking for ibis and we found them, but even more exciting, after we got some pictures of the ibis, we looked right in front of us, not 20 feet away, and in little tunnels, they make tunnels to these Virginia rail. Gilroy Water Treatment Plant with babies nesting, Virginia rail, who'd have thought? Then I started to look into it. It turns out that actually you would think that they would have come in first along the bay, right? No. Mike Rogers found the first county record up at Grant in the East Bay, in the ponds of Grant. And then Mike Mamerser and him later in 2006 went and found them breeding in the ponds throughout the eastern foothills. And it was completely unknown to be in this county before that.
That area?
What's that?
Up in Henry Cove?
No, Grant.
Oh, in Grant.
Joseph D. Grant.
Yeah.
Not the lake itself and those marshes, but some of the ponds up in behind.
Okay.
And Mike Rogers heard that and brought Namisser, and they went and found, I think, 5 or 6 more. And that was something I read about in Bausman's breeding atlas.
Do you wanna hear it?
Yes.
Yes.
This is how we find a Virginia wren.
Yes. Very bouncy.
Always
kind
happy
of
to hear
sound.
that.
What's that?
Oh, we're always happy to hear that sound.
Yes. So I think with more breaches coming and this, what they call horizontal levees, which is something I'm going to talk about in a minute, things are looking very hopeful for the Virginia rail. This picture is of A12. So you probably recognize, this is from yesterday, I took this picture. You recognize you're at Alviso Marina. And when I first moved here, there were boats along these docks, not anymore. Look at Salt Pond A12. That's in the pond. It's drained, empty, done. They are doing a new experimental levee system called horizontal levee. So instead of these ponds that come up and you're just on a thin little berm with a dirt muddy road on top, they're doing this more of a gradual slope where they can put paths and different types of vegetation as they get down closer to the water to get more different kinds of habitat and get mixed use out of that area. This particular boardwalk along here and along the creek back here is tidal, and it is where you can most reliably, or at least most easily, get black rail locally. This little guy is about the size of a mouse. He's about this big, and he acts like a mouse. If you see a mouse in the marsh, it could be a black rail. It runs around, sort of very scurrying around, very reclusive. The famous landmark for finding black rails at Alviso Marina is this orange Gatorade bottle cap. And anybody that's gone there looking for it knows. If you want to find them, you go out to the end and you go and you find, and this is how birding is, right? Look for the, land. So everyone always says, look near the Gatorade bottle, and that's one of the paths that the rail walks on. One of our friends, Patrick, put a GoPro on that spot and actually made a movie out of the Return of the Black Rail. You can also get them way out past the pump house if you want to walk 2 or 3 miles, and they're reliable out there by the tracks. The bird came more like you would expect, down from Palo Alto, Sunnyvale, and then into the South Bay, Alviso area.
You wanna hear it?
Yes. Oh yeah, this is a great
This
one.
is what you wanna listen
Kiki
for.
Dur.
We don't ever tape in the birds, so we just sit and wait, and hope, with fingers crossed, that we'll get to hear this.
Kiki Dur.
It's unmistakable. Kiki Dur.
So this bird is exceedingly rare. It only exists in a few tiny little pockets, and it's not just in the Bay Area, Texas and somewhere places in the southeast, Florida, and here. And it's very, very hard to find and detect, and we're lucky to have it, very lucky to have it. Now even more, so as rare as black rail is, Ridgway's rail had almost never been seen in the area. You had to go to Palo Alto Baylands, and if you wanted to get it in Santa Clara County, go right up to the San Mateo border. And that's still the most reliable spot to get them. However, on the boat ride, the ranger was saying out at the ghost town drawbridge of Alviso, they sometimes will hear the Ridgway rails. So they've come all the way down. In fact, from 2003, they were only in Palo Alto. Then you started to see like 2006 through 9, they were in Sunnyvale. They started, it took them from 2000 to 2015 to make it down to Alviso. So it took 12 years of range expansion and multiplying to get that far.
Let's hear them.
A little bit scratchy. this is
They
very,
sound the same to me.
yeah. Well, I talked a little bit about this new kind of levee they're building, and the ranger yesterday, Luke, showed me a picture that just really ignited my imagination. And if you've been out on the bay, you'll recognize the power towers in the eastern hills. But just imagine a multi-use area where you've got, because these levees are more sloped, you've got a lot more terrain and habitat that can be shared between people. And instead of having a desolate, barren salt evaporation ponds, you've got actually a fantastic, beautiful, restored waterfront. And we've seen it across the country in Baltimore and Boston and Seattle and San Diego. There's a lot of waterfronts that were just the shipping ports and train yards turned into just beauty, just flipped from worst to first.
I presume there's a proposal.
This is an artist concept of what it could be like from that organization that's doing Salt Pond 812.
It looks ugly.
I think it looks fun.
And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? You want to flip the light on?
Sure.
Yeah.
The new levees also provide flood protection too, right?
Mhm.
Don't they absorb more of the water that's coming in?
Yeah, there's a lot of benefits. And this is just experimental stuff, but it's
What's the
experimental
timeframes?
environmentalism. I think it's really cool.
When do they plan to have that one done?
This is a 50-year project. We're 16 years in. I mean,
No, just A16.
they said by the end of the year.
A12 by the end of
A12.
the year. I don't believe it.
That's what the sign says.
Impressive.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
Yes, Ed.
How much tidal variation is there from top to bottom, and how much do they expect it to change with global warming?
I don't know about global warming too much, but the tides that I've seen, the highest will be like typically 11, but you can get 12 or 13 feet. And then the low tide, typically, it can go below zero. I've seen -1, -2, even -3 on like an exaggerated. And we like the high tide. I call it a king rail tide, but these high tides, it pushes the birds up out of the marsh, the rails and stuff that live down in. So it's a great time to go look for these black rails. And,
Has Donald Trump agreed with you?
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
So this is a comment about Virginia Rail. Parents had 10 acres in Galt, which is out north of Stockton, southeast Sacramento, near Lodi. And sometimes their acreage would get flooded. And at one point in time, I put in a box for barn owls in their barn, and it got occupied right away. And so once a year, I would go see what was in the box or under the box. And so one day I found parts of Virginia Rail.
Oh, yeah.
So they do, wherever it's wet, they will go,
Interesting, especially like during migration, it's a weird phenomena that they like to, you'd think of them in a marsh by a lake, no, you'll find them in city streets.
Oh.
I don't know if they get confused or lost, but when we had one actually on McKee, or no, Penitentiary Creek.
At the country
Yeah,
club at
San
Allen
Jose
Rock.
Country Club, there was one just dead on the sidewalk. And I said, what, that doesn't seem like anywhere near where it should be. Then I started talking to an expert and he said, oh yeah, it happens all the time. Which is a little bit weird.
And
You had a question?
all this restoration and everything, I'm just hoping for yellow rail.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
me too.
Oh, yeah.
I was wondering, are you familiar with this hybrid Spartina grass, which is apparently a nasty invasive grass?
Yeah.
They're trying to help get rid of it,
Mhm.
yet it also ends up being habitat for some of these rails
Yeah.
here. And
Yeah.
given that they're having all this other habitat, sort of more native, I think, species, do you know if that's potential for working out that you could sort of get rid of the invasive Spartina
Yeah,
grass?
hopefully. It's hard to though.
But yet still have the
Mhm.
habitat?
I think there's hope for that. Yeah, it's, with all this, everything I read, I was hoping for good news somewhere, and every piece of good news had a little chunk of bad news with it, or concerns or something, so it's a delicate game we're playing, but it seems like we're going in the right direction. And the numbers that
Apparently,
we
this
saw-
expansion is not good for all the birds.
No, no,
So it's a toss-up.
it's a toss-up, yeah, we're gonna try something, we can't just watch it go down the toilet, so, we're doing the best we can. All right.
So I want to thank Bill for giving us this really enlightening talk. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you all for being here. I just want to let you know that next month we're going to have a photographer talking about his travels around the world. John Richardson will be speaking to us next month. And then following that, in January, we're going to have a talk with October's John Richardson, and we have an author of a woodpecker book, and he knows more about woodpeckers than any of you can probably say. And then in January, we're going to have the author, Obi Kaufman, of the California Wildlife Atlas, to speak with us. And I think we've got some other authors and artists lined up over the course of the year, so it's going to be an exciting time for the speaker series. So thanks again for coming, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you hopefully next month.